Welcome back to the Mina Kimes Show featuring Lenny, the only NFL podcast where one of the hosts is just happy that everybody's finding their forever homes. It's free agency week, and I am once again here to talk about some of the biggest signings of free agency. Earlier in the week, we did an emergency pod to react to the Seahawks news, talked a little bit of Devontae Adams, DK Metcalf, Geno Smith, the Raiders, all of that. But there are so many more big signings that must be discussed. So naturally, I brought back the man behind the 100 top free agents list every year, many of whom actually are still available, the host of NFL Daily, last seen praising Geno Smith. You might be the leader of the Geno Hive, Gregg Rosenthal. Welcome
Yeah,
back.
they give me about 5 minutes a year on an NFL Network news show, and I thought I am going to use those minutes to talk about what a bad move it was to get rid of Geno Smith. Always great to be with you.
You're like the scientist in Don't Look Up, where you're like, okay, I'm on TV. I'm gonna go rogue here and talk about what a bad decision this was. We don't have to revisit that. You can actually choose. So what we're gonna do is I'm gonna go through every position group and talk about the signings thus far, and each of us is going to pick one that we really loved, which is kind of hard with some of these, to be honest. Some of these, and then one we have questions about. And questions about doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad signing. It could mean, or trade. There's a few trades as well. It could mean, like, I'm just curious if this augurs a scheme change. What does this mean for someone else on the roster? Things like that. So it doesn't have to be negative, although it can be negative. It can be a signing that made you scratch your head. There weren't many of those, I will say. There weren't like that many like big deals that immediately caused me to raise my eyebrows, perhaps because there weren't that many big deals, period, Greg.
Yeah, you mentioned there's players left on the list, but not that many. There's about 30 as of taping this out of 101. Like they went fast. And because there weren't superstars, and it's also confirmation bias for me. It's like, well, if I'm going to rank him as the 30th best free agent, I can't kill him. Certain positions got paid a lot more than usual. We'll get into all that.
All right. So at this moment, we are still on Aaron Rodgers' watch.
Could be a while. So, but he knows how to own a news cycle, Mina. This is his time the next 3 or 4 weeks if he wants to own it, which I suspect he does.
He might, although I asked around and some folks told me it could happen today. So I have my texts open. Producer Tucker will let us know if we have to react live to either him or Russell Wilson, who are really the remaining dominoes left in quarterback free agency. I guess also Jameis Winston is still available. So to recap where everyone ended up and moved, we have, as discussed at length earlier, Sam Darnold signing with the Seahawks, 3 years, $100 million, really a $55 million deal. Geno Smith to the Raiders, no contract there yet, interestingly enough. So that's something...
It's supposed to come this week. I think it's coming this week. They had to wait till the new league year started.
I'm curious to see what that is because it's relevant to the trade talk, right? Like when folks are asking me like, well, at the Seahawks, what is their logic here? I have to see the Geno extension to actually evaluate that, in my opinion. Justin Fields to the Jets, 2 years, $40 million, $30 million guaranteed, which is basically 1 year money these days. And then we got a bunch of... Daniel Jones to the Colts, 1 year, $14 million. I think could be a little bit more. True quarterback competition with Anthony Richardson. And then we have a bunch of backups. Josh Dobbs to the Patriots, Jarrett Stidham to the Broncos, Jimmy Garoppolo back to the Rams, Zach Wilson, this one's kind of interesting, to the Dolphins. And then Jacoby Brissett to the Cardinals. And then the Eagles managed to get something for Kenny Pickett, a fifth, and Dorian Thompson-Robinson. So, Greg, all of those moves, and you can talk about Geno, Sam, and Justin if you want. That's on the table for you. What is something that you loved?
Oh, I didn't think about Geno because you guys covered it so well. Like, I cannot top. Danny Kelly's, like, dark laughter, by the way, is the best in the game. And then Jackson's, like, pathos. I can't match that. So I'm going to go Justin Fields, though. I like, and we haven't talked much about this guy on my show, NFL Daily, but I like that Tanner Engstrom, their new offensive coordinator from Detroit, I think has a vision. They went out aggressively after Justin Fields. I expected him to go back to Pittsburgh, and I think they just blew the Steelers out of the water financially because I think they thought about him with an offensive line that actually has a lot of good players on it right now and played pretty well last year. And you put him in that backfield with Braylon Allen and Breece Hall. You do have a number one receiver. And I don't know if it's going to work. Maybe I'm falling into the podcaster trap of like we're still believing in Justin Fields, but we saw a lot of good things. And I think in this market where there wasn't the perfect solution and maybe they're not into Shedeur Sanders and they could still draft him if they wanted to anyways, I thought this could be a fun year. If I'm looking for a historical comp, maybe the Tyrod year in Buffalo before they got rid of him and they made the playoffs with the new Sean McDermott staff. And it was like he helped establish kind of the ground floor that Josh Allen eventually took over, but it was a fun year and they could actually be a little spicy and hard to deal with on offense.
Yeah, there's not a lot of pressure on this situation for the Jets. There is for Justin Fields because I think this is probably his last shot at being a starter, and I see why he chose it, setting aside the money, although it does sound like it was the most money. But for the Jets, you contrast that with the Seahawks with Darnold, where like that has got to work, right? Like that they better have bet right there. Doesn't matter for the Jets. I say that in a complimentary fashion. I talked about this. I like the self-awareness of the franchise being like, we know this is not our year. We're not a quarterback away. So let's get a guy who still, we believe, probably has some upside. The one thing I do want to see is if he does positively impact the run game, because I thought that would happen in Pittsburgh and it didn't. And he really wasn't utilized as much as a runner as I expected with the Steelers. And I don't know how much of that was Justin Fields, potentially, the coordinator, whatnot. I suspect that the Jets are thinking about him as are expecting to have a strong QB run component, which is interesting, by the way, because Tanner Engstrand coming from Detroit, we have not seen that offense with a dual threat quarterback in Detroit. So don't really know what that'll look like, but I agree. I think it's interesting. If I'm a Jets fan, again, I'm happier that they did that than one, reaching in the draft, or two, paying a guy for multiple years. So I think it's a good move for them. I'm going to go Daniel Jones for mine.
Wow.
I think this was actually the perfect signing for the Colts. They had to bring in competition for Anthony Richardson. I think that was sort of a foregone conclusion after how things went last year with them, and then benching him, and then Flacco came in, and Flacco sucked. And in my mind, Daniel Jones is actually kind of like the perfect, if you can't beat him, what are we doing here, quarterback.
That's true.
But because if he was worse, I think it would be like, this isn't real competition. Like, let's say it was Marcus Mariota. And I think that's maybe a good comp, because I think Jones is better, much better. And there's more upside there. And we've seen that with Jones and Mariota. So that would be like fake competition. I think if you were to pay Sam Darnold, it would be like, okay, it's over. Right. I think Jones was like just the right level of competition for Anthony Richardson this offseason. My hope, though, is that they make this choice in the offseason and then they actually just go with it throughout more of the season than last year. And I'm not confident that they're going to do that, Greg. Either way, by the way, whoever wins.
Yeah, this was actually my questionable pick, and my question was, is Chris Ballard and Shane Steichen on the same page here? And I hear you that he's the right guy to beat out in what looks publicly to be a real competition, and I believe it. I think the front office might be looking at Daniel Jones as the starter, and they're a little impatient with Anthony Richardson, and you have Pat McAfee throwing out very specific things about Anthony Richardson's work habits, which I don't love to hear, but these whispers come from somewhere, and it seems like there's a lot of whispering to a lot of reporters about Daniel Jones and Anthony Richardson. My question, though, is Shane Steichen on board with this? And I disagree that Jones was the best he could do, because he's not the Danny Dimes that I overrated 5 years ago when I wrote a nice article you mocked me for on this show where I pumped him and Drew Lock up. I mean, they were like the best rookies that year. He's coming off a major shoulder surgery, and he didn't look like the same guy. I feel like I'm getting gaslit a little bit in the coverage of Daniel Jones, because last year he was awful. And I think it was the worst Jones we saw. The year before, he was pretty awful. and he had career-threatening neck injuries before he had major shoulder surgery, and he didn't look right last year. So to me, like, who is Daniel Jones? If you're just looking for who's the best quarterback available, like I would take Gardner Minshew or Marcus Mariota over those guys. Not like they're real competition. I just think
Wait,
I would trust them more.
You think Mariota and Minshew are better than Daniel Jones at this point?
Based on what
Wow,
I've
I
seen and the shoulder
wow,
injuries and everything, I'm a
that
little
is
worried. I'm
I
a
am
little worried.
we rarely disagree. I completely disagree with that. Did you watch Gardner Minshew
Okay,
last?
that was a bad example. I should have said Jacoby Brissett, who by the way, I like that signing for the Cardinals. That was a bad example. You're right, but I just
I think
don't know
that's
if this guy
who
has it
else?
anymore. I don't know if he
I
has
think
it.
that's fair. I guess I just wonder, like, if you're going to bring in competition for Anthony Richardson, I'm not really sure who else would have been that sort of barometer
It
of
was
these
Fields,
options.
and there was reporting that
Fields,
he was
yeah.
their first choice, but they
I would
weren't
have
going to
liked
go
that.
in.
I would have
Yeah,
liked that, but not at $30 million guaranteed.
yeah.
Okay, my questionable one. Um, I'm wondering about the Zach. Well, I'm gonna go with the Browns trading for Kenny Pickett. What? Why'd they do that?
Yeah.
I don't get that.
I hope
Why would
it's to be a
fifth round
backup.
draft? It's
Yeah.
definitely to be a backup, but like what?
Well, I heard some speculation like, hey, look, if the Browns trading for Kenny Pickett is changing what they do at the top of the draft, that really says what they see in the draft. I'm like, it better not be. I know the Browns have made some bad quarterback decisions, but man, they have eyes. Like there's no way. And yet, could he be the backup to Kirk Cousins? And they're not planning to take a quarterback at the top of the draft. That could be, but that was a head scratcher to me because clearly the Eagles, wanted Tanner McKee over Kenny Pickett, and I don't blame him off the limited sample size we saw.
Okay. Wide receivers next.
Mm-hmm.
So you have the DK deal. You can choose that. 5 years, $150 million extension with the Pittsburgh Steelers, who traded their second round draft pick for him. Hollywood Brown goes back to the Chiefs on a deal worth up to $11 million. I haven't looked at the details, but Chris Godwin returns to the Bucs, 3 years, up to 66, but 44 guaranteed. Darius Slayton stays with the Giants, 3 years, 36. The Bills bring in Josh Palmer on also 3 years, 36. That's an interesting comp between those two receivers. DeAndre Hopkins joins the Ravens on a 1-year, $5 million contract, so very low. De'Ami Brown ends up going to the Jaguars on a 1-year, $10 million deal, which is also what Tutu Atwell got from the Rams. The Seahawks just signed Marquez Valdez-Scantling to a 1-year deal. I haven't seen the numbers on that yet, but I imagine it's probably single digits.
I think they initially reported around 4 or 5.
Christian Kirk was traded to the Texans for a 7th round draft pick, but he has a contract that's at $16 million this year, $16.25 million. We'll see if they do some kind of restructuring there. And that's it. There's still some guys remaining. Diggs, Allen, a lot of old guys. Amari Cooper, Brandon Cooks, Tyler Lockett, and then Cooper Kupp, who was released by the Rams. So which of these deals did you like? Let's start there.
Can I go off that board and just go Devontae? Because I think Devontae Adams is ultimately
talked about him. Yeah, I mean we all love that for the Rams. So
yeah, maybe that's too obvious. I'll go Darius Slayton then because I find it funny that for years they tried to replace this dude, and every year like they would bench him. Like there's a laundry list of failed Giants draft picks that like Darius Slayton played behind in training camp. He was literally their 4th receiver so many different times, and they could not find a better receiver than him. They finally did in Malik Neighbors, and then they get to free agency and they look around and they're like, oh yeah, Darius Slayton has always been a really good role player who has a specific job in the offense. And compared to these other deals, like maybe a few we'll get into, I like the money for that just as a good role player. Kirk was another move I did enjoy as well.
That one's mine. I'll talk about that in a second. Slayton is funny because I think part of the reason why Daniel Jones always had decent deep ball numbers, even not in volume because he didn't push the ball downfield, but the actual like efficiency was always very good, was a big part of that was Darius Slayton. Like he is a legitimate, decently sized downfield target. And I think pairs nicely with Neighbors in that regard because Neighbors is obviously, you can win downfield as well, but he can work underneath. You see him on those crossers. He gets yards after the catch, and he is the target monster. I think for Slayton, though, it's hard for me to know how to feel about it without knowing who's playing quarterback for the Giants.
Mm.
I do think, like, if they were to go the Russell Wilson route, I would like that pairing a bit because of the ability to win deep outside the numbers. Um, the other thing I'll say is, the Giants drafted Jalen Hyatt in the 3rd round a couple years ago. He never Slayton has, as you alluded to, sort of fended him off. I wonder if he's a trade target for a team maybe that's looking for a deep threat. Not that he ever showed that much in the NFL thus far, but it's a reasonable deal for a good player. I think for me, I just want to see like who's throwing him the football, because otherwise, it feels like there's a possibility that his talents could be wasted in this offense if they don't have a quarterback who pushes the ball downfield. You alluded to Christian Kirk. That was going to be mine. I really liked this trade for the Texans. So, the draft pick is nothing. It's really just a salary dump, and I'll be curious to see if they want to do an extension with him. He's 28 years old. Obviously has dealt with some injuries, but their deep threat, Tank Dell, is likely to miss, if not the entire season, a very good chunk of it with the injury that he suffered at the very end of last year, multiple ligaments, I believe, in his knee. And they needed a deep ball guy because CJ Stroud will push the ball downfield. I always think about like when you run dagger and Nico runs the in, who's running the go. And to me, Kirk is, which is like a very like Texans, they run a lot of that. Kirk to me is like kind of the perfect example for that out of the slot. I mean, he has a deep ball ability out of the slot that is not that common in the NFL, quite frankly, without being tiny. So I feel like I like this as a Dell hedge. I like it. They've got this offensive coordinator coming from the Rams, Nick Caley, where they obviously use slot receivers a great deal. And I like that they did it to kind of get out ahead of free agency because, when we look at some of these receivers, I named a bunch of them. Yeah. Christian Kirk is better than most of these guys. I know the contract always, was kind of becoming like a laughing stock of the NFL, but like it ended up looking like not that bad by the end of it. And I think if they do a reasonable deal with him, they won't regret it.
It was perfectly fine. It's lived long enough that he's coming off some major injuries. And I look at 1 year, $16 million, which is basically what it is. And I said, oh, that's perfect because this is what the cap space is for. And they're a little closer than some of the teams to the cap. But to have a solution that's going to help you this year when you're kind of desperate at wide receiver, Stephon Diggs is still a free agent. And you mentioned Dell, like they needed someone else. And they got what was basically the top of the wide receiver market, except for Davante Adams, which, yeah, I didn't want to repeat everything you guys said, but to me, like that might be the single free agent move that makes the biggest difference in a Super Bowl hunt was Davante Adams. But Kirk could be pretty important too because they just don't have enough receivers there.
Godwin also staying with the Bucs really quickly. I mean, that's obviously a win for the franchise. Took less than he could have gotten in free agency. One of the cases where I actually believe that when it's reported.
Yeah, my Patriots couldn't give away money early in free agency, but eventually they found some people. But Godwin was that guy, I think. Before
he went down with the injury last year, he led the league in first downs by a significant margin. Finished 6th in receiving yards per game. He has had injuries over the years. That would be my only concern at his age. But I think this was absolutely worth it for Tampa for, again, especially relative to the field. My question is not actually about one of these signings. My question is this. What are the Chargers and Pats doing, man? Because we'll talk about, the Pats, very strong emphasis on defense, and we'll talk about some of their signings, some of which I liked a lot. And they signed a tackle as well. The Chargers, both of those teams needed offensive line help and receiver help. I'm not saying like these guys were worth breaking the bank for, but I am shocked that we're already, this far into free agency and neither has really found options. Yeah.
There just weren't options out there. Now, maybe I overrated Amari Cooper. He is by far the highest guy left on my top 101. The rest of the top 25 is literally gone except for Amari Cooper, like of all the players. I just think that Godwin was a fit, for instance, for the Patriots, and I think they were the team. Ian Rappaport at NFL Network said $20 million on the table, and he was saying that was in the first couple of years of the deal. That seems crazy. I don't know if I believe that, but maybe over the length of the deal. And then after that, the Patriots don't need another number 3 receiver. I'm glad they didn't sign Josh Palmer. I'm actually glad they didn't even trade for Christian Kirk, even though I like Christian
What
Kirk.
about, should either of those teams have traded for DK Metcalf?
Yes. And I think the Patriots were hard in on him. And I did ask around, and I don't think the Chargers were interested at all. That surprises me. I don't think the Chargers were in on any of these receivers. So their strategy makes less sense to me. From what I heard, I think the Patriots offered more, and the draft picks, would have been slightly better for DK Metcalf, but DK was not feeling the Patriots. So it happens.
What is your questionable signing or non-signing?
This was the one where the question was just why, and that was the Josh Palmer deal, $18 million guaranteed.
Yeah, that was I'm glad you brought that one up. Yeah.
Because they were another team that I thought, like, they don't need another third receiver.
Guy. Yeah. He's a good player, but it was just not what I thought they would add speed.
Maybe it's living in LA, but I'm Harbaugh coded now, where I'm like, man, they really wanted a lot out of Josh Palmer and they didn't get it. And that makes me wary of him, because I know that they were really hoping for him to have a breakout season, and he just wasn't consistent, had a great quarterback there. And so that was just a why for me.
DeAndre Hopkins to the Ravens is kind of fun, just because DeAndre Hopkins had like the worst quarterback play in the NFL of any receiver for years, and now winds up his career with Mahomes and Jackson, but kind of at the wrong time. But also at $5 million, it's like totally fine for the Ravens. I think they'll find ways to use him maybe in the slot a bit more too, with Flowers outside. Okay, let's do tight ends and running backs together, because it's not a lot of deals. So tight ends. We have Mike Gesicki sticking with the Bengals, 3 years, $25 million. Juwan Johnson sticking with the Saints, 3 years, $30 million with 21 guaranteed. The Saints are so funny, man. The Jags cut Evan Ingram, who's available. That's one to monitor.
Visiting the Chargers, so that would be a pickup for them.
I would like that a lot. Even though it's funny, he's not like a blocker, but they have Disley who can block. So I do like that. Luke Farrell from the Jags. This one was, signed with the Niners on a 3-year deal worth up to $20 million, 11 guaranteed. So those are the tight ends. I don't think I missed anything, right? Those are the major tight end deals. Running backs, Aaron Jones, Vikings, 2 years, $20 million, 13 guaranteed, which is the most of any back this cycle. Najee Harris, Chargers, 1 year. I saw up to $9.5 million, but I know that's funny money.
It was $5 base. Yeah, $5 million base.
So cheap. Javonte Williams, Cowboys, $3 million 1 year. Ty Johnson returned to the Bills on a 2-year deal. I haven't seen the dollars on that. And then Kyle Juszczyk was released. End of an era in San Francisco. So of all those tight end running back deals, which one do you like?
And then you left Kenny Gainwell out to the Steelers, which I liked. That's a fun little move. But that's not going to be my pick, though.
Duplicative with Jaylen Warren, though. Whatever.
Yeah, but he's just a good player. I always thought he deserved more. And yeah, you're right. They're kind of running the all third down back offense. But I always thought there was like a little more Gainwell could do, and I suspect he'll get the chance. I'm going to go with the former Steeler here. I'll go with Najee Harris, because for $5 million, I don't love him as a player. Like, he's not my type of back. And yet at that price, he runs so hard and he fits, I think, what the Chargers are going to want to do. And they will wring every last drop out of Najee Harris, that I don't think it's going to stop them from drafting a running back necessarily either. But there was this idea that, the running back market's going to be inflated because of Saquon Barkley. It's like, no, there's only one Saquon Barkley. Najee Harris did not do well in this market at all. And so for that price, it just kind of fills... It checks a box for the Chargers that they needed to check. They can still draft one if they want, but I think he'll just kind of fit what Harbaugh wants to do there with Gregg Roman.
Would you be upset if they didn't draft anyone, though, if you're a Chargers fan?
would they bring back Dobbins in that scenario and just make that the duo? Yes, I kind of would. I want a young back in that offense. I want one that they're developing that's kind of their guy, because this contract to me doesn't say their guy. It says maybe we'll use the best that Najee Harris has to offer for like the rest of his career, because he does run hard, and I really question the way that the Steelers schemed up their run game last year, and so I do think he'll wind up looking better if a team like the Chargers could scheme it better.
So I'm not super high on Harris. I think like a lot when I was doing a free agency preview, I was talking about the backs who had positive rush yards over expected, which is something I would kind of look for when evaluating running back free agents. He was negative. He's been negative. There's a lot of stuffed runs behind some pretty bad run blocking. But I do like the fact that my hope is, because the Chargers at pick 22, I've seen them linked to some running backs, Amarian Hampton. I think they have bigger needs, interior offensive line and wide receiver, clearly. So I think I would like this if it made them wait to draft a back in the mid rounds. This is an incredibly deep running back class. I would rather have them address those needs earlier on. I'll be really quick. I think Ty Johnson is an awesome player.
Yeah.
One of the best pass catching running backs, maybe the best, honestly, after that playoff catch in football. I think that's a really important part of the Bills' offense now, is having backs who can catch, especially because of all the too high that they face and that need to work underneath. So I think keeping him was smart and important. Question mark signings.
I mean, it was tough to pick a favorite signing in these two classes. This was like getting to the top of your Love is Kimes rankings at the end of this season. It was like, we're grading on a curve here. It was easier to pick ones I didn't like. You want me to go first? Sorry.
There's a lot of Daves, Devins, and Bens in this group. I mean, the Saints, I don't know what the hell is going on. Okay, so because the Saints also signed Justin Reed, we'll get to that contract. I have really come to love the Saints fan base, because they've entered the delightful we hate our GM phase of the fan cycle, which is always the most fun phase in terms of interactions. But when this signing crossed, I think I just posted like LOL or like, okay, sure. Johnson's a good player. He's flashed at times. It's just like, I don't understand why they believe they should be signing these kinds of contracts. And one fan wrote, "You just don't get it." I was like, what don't I get, buddy? At this, like, we still have Loomis believers, because none of this makes sense to me.
Here's what I didn't get until you were talking and I finally thought about it. They just didn't want Sean Payton to have him. Sean Payton going to Denver got Juwan Johnson so much money. The Broncos were reportedly heavily in on Gesicki. The Bengals went over the top. They were in on Juwan Johnson. Mickey Loomis and Sean Payton are in some sort of like frenemy death spiral here, where he didn't want to let him go to New Orleans. But yeah, this was my question too. And the question is, why are you trying to run it back with the 2024 Saints? They are the worst team in NFL history to run it back. They restructured 8 of their contracts. I think in any other organization, this would feel like a fresh start. It's Kellen Moore. It just feels like it's Mickey Loomis's franchise, and Kellen Moore kind of replaces Dennis Allen as the somewhat forgettable head coach.
What is your pick for this category?
Well, that was it. But I will ask a different question, which is, does signing Javonte Williams make it more or less likely the Cowboys draft a running back high? I hope the answer is yes.
I think more, because okay. I think if they had signed, I still think Rico Dowdle is going to get a little bit more money than that. I think he's a better player. And I was actually thinking if the Cowboys paid Rico Dowdle to stay, that would make it less likely that they're drafting a running back early. I think this deal, which is nothing, makes me think they're 100% doing it. We're on Genty watch. 12.
If he gets there, a lot of Raiders, Genty buzz.
Yeah, it's for some reason every single signing in free agency has made every team think it's more likely that they're going to draft Ashton Genty. So, okay, offensive line. So this is more interesting. There's a lot of big deals and trades. So just to recap some of them, Dan Moore Jr., Pittsburgh Steelers left tackle, goes to the Titans. 4 years, $82 million, $50 guaranteed, quite a bit. Morgan Moses to the Patriots, who is the right tackle with the Jets, 3 years, $24 million. Drew Dahlman to the Bears, 3 years, $42 million, 28 guaranteed. The Bears also traded for Jonah Jackson and Joe Tooney, so completely revamping the interior of that offensive line. The Vikings were very active, signing both Will Freeze from the Colts, who's a guard, to a pretty large deal, 5 years, $88 million. Ryan Kelly from the Colts. Oh, I guess they signed both of the Colts. Now I think about it. So they just took the Colts interior offensive line to Minnesota. Ryan Kelly's not a very big deal. 2 years, $18 million. The Chiefs, this was surprising, signed Niners backup left tackle Jalen Moore, 2 years, $30 million. Ronnie Stanley, the Ravens extended, 3 years, $60 million. The Packers signed all these Niners. Aaron Banks, guard, to a 4-year, $77 million deal. The Jags added Patrick McCarry, who's a Ravens swing offensive lineman, played every position, 3 years, $37 million. The Dolphins signed James Daniels from the Steelers, who's a guard, 3 years, $24 million. And then finally, the Commanders traded a 2025 third and seventh and 2026 second and fourth for Laramie Tunsil and a 4th round pick. So that is a massive trade. You can pick that. You can pick any of the signings. Which do you like?
Okay. I do want to talk Tunsil because that's the most fascinating deal. But the one I like because of what it says about the Ravens is the Ronnie Stanley deal. And I do think it says something about the Ravens and the Buccaneers specifically that they were able to keep Stanley and Godwin. $44 million guaranteed. And it's not like Stanley was choosing between bad teams. The Patriots, I think, were going to go over the top with money. But the Chiefs, I think, were building their offseason plan around signing Ronnie Stanley. I've heard it publicly reported, and I've heard it privately talked that they were hard in on him, and he chose to stay with the Ravens. Now, he's familiar with the training staff. He's had a lot of injuries. He's been there, but they made him take a pay cut before last season. You have to be a pretty great organization from the top to the bottom, the coaching staff to the administration, all of that stuff to make a dude take a pay cut. And then the following year, he's maybe taking less money or he's giving you at least the benefit of the doubt and wanting to stay home. And this is how, great teams can stay great. So I just love that Stanley move.
The Ryan Stanley deal was my favorite of the entire free agency
Yep.
from a team perspective. I think I was asked about this on SportsCenter yesterday, and I pointed to that, and the Adams one as another deal that I liked for all the reasons that you just said. I mean, clearly the best tackle option in a fairly weak class, and they ended up paying him at an annual rate that doesn't even move him. He's 8th at $20 million APY. Like, that is such a bargain for a player who was really good and healthy last year. Ranked 9th in ESPN's pass block win rate metric, allowed only 2 sacks. I think this is a huge win for the organization. So yeah, I was a little bit surprised, honestly. I thought he would hit free agency and get more, but there's obviously he has his reasons for staying, and he's been through a lot with this team, and it's a team that is largely retaining their offensive core. So I love this for them. I think it was a really, really good deal. So I'll pick another one, a different one though. I'm gonna go with Ryan Kelly to the Vikings. I know he's been injured. I think he played about half of the season, maybe a little bit more last year. But I just generally love bringing a veteran center when you have a rookie quarterback. Now it's assuming that JJ McCarthy is going to start week 1. Dahlman, for the same reason, but he got so much more money. I think this is different players, different strengths and weaknesses, but I like that. I think generally, the Freeze deal is a little bit more rich, I think, though, but I do like the Vikings addressing their trenches, both sides of the ball, by the way, is pretty strong emphasis for them. I question everything about this Tunsil trade. I want to talk through with you because I think the Commanders won, but I have questions for them. this is such a weird trade to me because in a vacuum, I think this is a really good trade for the Texans actually to get this sort of value for a player who's, I think, clearly declining at this point. He's 31 years old. Maybe he wants a new contract. He has a couple years left. That would change my perception of it from Washington's side. Still a good player, though. Penalties were an issue last year. But in a vacuum, they got a pretty decent haul for him, right? Like second, third, a fourth. They gave it back a fourth in the seventh. But it's not in a vacuum. They have the worst offensive line in football, and they just took out the best player. So I guess if they have like so much confidence in their ability to replace him and scout the position, but what would give them that sort of confidence, Greg? So I guess let's start there. The Texans side is clearly the more confusing side to me. Do you get it? Like, do you think it's defensible?
Yes, after I thought it through more, I think there's a lot of answers to it. Number one, they are paying Titus Howard a lot of money, and Aaron Wilson, who covers them locally, says Titus Howard is their left tackle, and he's been a right tackle before.
Did they see him play right tackle?
That's at least the plan. Maybe they'll be drafting for the future, but they have someone there who they'd move. He didn't really work at guard. They have Blake Fisher. Okay, so that's part of it. I think they saw the Derek Stingley contract, which is due this. They could pay him this year coming up. The Will Anderson contract coming up. The C.J. Stroud contract coming up. They saw getting out this year on Tunsil. They can get a lot for him. Maybe they see him not a guy who, like C.J. Stroud even said it publicly in an interview once with the Pivot, kind of like, man, Tunsil's on that veteran plan. If they're asking him to do extra at practice, like he's not doing it. Like he's saying no. And that gets me to what I think is the biggest reason. So Seth Payne, who covers them locally, talks about Swarm. You know about Swarm?
I know about
D'Amico
Swarm.
Ryans and Swarm. Okay. Yeah. Shoot, now I forget what it means. It's like super motivated, whatever. I'm trying really hard. It's their big motivation, extra effort, all this stuff. And D'Amico Ryans believes in that like a fundamentalist preacher. And that Tunsil was maybe not their vision for that. Like he's not Swarm. Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, who they brought in, he's Swarm, and you add all of those things up together, and they just thought it was time.
Kenyon Green for CJGJ. I mean, the Texans defense was awesome last year. They're probably going to be even more awesome this year. But I just I don't understand how you watch that offensive line last year and feel like it's okay to, I don't know.
It might also be a defensive coach that cares more about the defense.
It might be.
You're absolutely right. Here's what Swarm means: special work ethic and relentless mindset. So it might have been a culture thing with the guy they inherited who was really good, but maybe wasn't getting it done as a run blocker as much. There was some talk about that missed assignments.
It's true,
like
but also just like I this is again goes back to what I say, which is in a vacuum, this is totally logical. If I believed they had an heir apparent, if I had confidence in their ability to improve a disastrous offensive line situation, I would feel a lot better because in a vacuum, it makes a lot of sense. It's just not in a vacuum. Also kind of curious from the Commanders side, just because their rookie left tackle, Brandon Coleman, I thought played decent last year. Tunsil's still an upgrade, so I guess this would mean they view Coleman potentially moving to the right side. We'll see if they move Wiley inside. That was just my question, Greg. Otherwise, I get it. Like, they saw an opportunity. I mean, the offensive line, I think, was exposed against the Eagles, and they wanted to fix it. I have other questions about the Commanders, but this I could understand.
Yeah, and I said all that from the Texans side, and yet I wouldn't say it's a no-brainer from the Commanders side, but unless they're having to give up a ton of new guaranteed money, it's a risk worth taking. Now, I'd say like, oh, this is what you do when your rookie's, quarterback is on his contract, but so is C.J. Stroud, so that doesn't really hold weight. I like it. My question is, are the 49ers like an offensive line factory without us knowing it? Because Jalen Moore and Aaron Banks, I ranked Aaron Banks way too low compared to what the league viewed about him. A guard from the 49ers, $27 million signing bonus. It's a real deal that he's going to get like $20 million a year for 2 to 3 years. And I hate those guard moves in free agency because I think coaching and development can make the biggest difference in terms of offensive linemen, and the Packers are amazing at it. So that I didn't get it. I know in the playoff game they got exposed a little bit with injuries, but I was just really surprised about that. And then the Chiefs making a bet on Jalen Moore, paying him $15 million a year off 5 games. It's a fascinating move. It's either going to be great or terrible, but he was their backup plan apparently to Ronnie Stanley. And considering the options out there, it was a creative one, but I can't say like whether that's going to work or not. But man, that was surprising.
Yeah, I mean, ostensibly a pretty big downgrade from Stanley. The Chiefs, I've talked to Mitch Schwartz about this. They're so specific in what they look for and ask out of their offensive linemen. So this feels like them scouting more and seeing something that maybe is a good fit. I didn't watch him super closely, but there was definitely a drop off without Trent Williams. That was pretty noticeable on that Niners offense. But again, that's Trent Williams. He's the best left tackle in the NFL, or one of them. Yeah, that one I am suspicious of. But again, it's a really small sample size with Jalen Moore. It's not, that's real money. So we'll see if that bet pays off. All right, let's take a quick break, come back and hit the defense. All right, we are back. Defensive tackle was one of the more active position groups in free agency, some pretty big deals. I'll just start ripping them off. Milton Williams was the big one to the Patriots after a swerve from the Carolina Panthers. 4 years, $104 million, so that's 26 APY, 63 guaranteed. Jonathan Allen was cut by the Commanders and then signed by the Vikings on a 3-year, $60 million contract. Poona Ford, the Rams picked up, 3 years, $30 million. Did you see the tweet? I think it was a tweet, or somebody said Brenda Song said fix the run defense and Les Snead signed Poona Ford immediately. I thought that was funny. I don't know if you saw the viral Brenda Song Rams analysis.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Grady Jarrett to the Bears, 3 years, $43.5 million, 28.5 guaranteed. Javon Kinlaw, there is some real dubious ones here. Javon Kinlaw, Commanders, 3-year, $45 million, 30 guaranteed. BJ Hill back to the Bengals, 3 years, 33. Solomon Thomas, Cowboys, 2 years, 8. Tershawn Wharton as a consolation prize to the Panthers, 3 years up to 54. That surprised me. 30 guaranteed. And then some smaller ones. The Bucks bring back Greg Gaines. The Broncos bring back DJ Jones. That was actually 3 year, 39. The Chargers signed Tyler Tart. All right. Do you like any of these?
I mean, for the money, I think we have to adjust our money expectations. I know our friend Bill Barnwell has been talking about that, not just in terms of percentage of salary cap, but also in terms of the cap space that's out there. As the league year is starting, almost half the league has $40 million in cap space. After all this spending, the Patriots still have 80, 90 million. Like, you can't get rid of this cap space. So I actually do think you're not trying hard enough if you're not spending closer to the cap. And so my pick is Milton Williams, because if you're going to spend too much money, at least he's an ascending player coming off his best season, coming off just a ridiculous playoff run. You know, there's a little bit of a concern that the best football he ever played was week 11 on, absolutely, and in the playoffs. But considering how much cap space they have, get a guy that's 25 years old, that's getting into his prime, that's ultimately a 2-year deal. It's basically 2 for 51. It's very even throughout the 4 years of this contract. It's all guaranteed basically the first 2 years. And then if it didn't work out, you know, like I said, you have to spend that cap space. And I just think he was a better option than anyone else out there.
I agree. You know, the question with Williams is he a Jalen Carter merchant? Christian Barmore did come back last year. He had the blood clots, right? I believe was the issue. And he's no slouch when he's healthy. So I guess my question about the Patriots is this. So they came into free agency with a ton of money. Mm-hmm. And then I think they surprised a little bit by mostly spending it on defense. So on one hand, I applaud that because I'm like averse to the idea of overspending for need. The defensive free agents were better than the offensive free agents. Milton Williams, arguably the best defensive player in free agency in terms of the, you know, money and positional value and all that, and age. So on one hand, I'm like, I do like that the Patriots said, you know what, our defense was awful last year. This is where the better players are. This is where we're going to spend our money. On the other hand, I am still so worried for Drake May. So I
Right.
guess I have like mixed. How do you view the Patriots' overall approach to free agency? Because it is entirely defensible, and I think they added good players on defense.
Right. It was mixed. If they got the players they wanted, like DK or Godwin or Stanley,
Right.
which they were like, I would have liked it, but they couldn't spend all that money. I think you're right. I think Milton Williams was the best one though, because the rest of them are older players that are just raising the
Landry is
floor.
fine. Carlton Davis.
Yeah, and I like Carlton Davis was someone. I think that contract's fine. All the cornerbacks got about the same contract. We'll get to them. Um, the Harold Landry contract I didn't like at all. I've been less high on the Mike Vrabel is going to save the franchise idea that Patriots fans have. People locally were so upset. Oh, Elliot Wolf still has the final say. How could that be? First of all, it's Vrabel when the first big move you make is Harold Landry. And then second, I don't know if Vrabel and McDaniels are the two guys I trust like for cutting edge thinking, and if Vrabel's running a lot of the personnel departments, but mostly they sign good players. And like I said, they have to spend the cap space in their 80, 90 minutes. So I'm fine with it. I think it'll work out better than the last free agent spending spree they had, which Bill Belichick did in the Mike Gesicki, Hunter Henry
The
year that
Jono
didn't go.
Smith
Yeah,
year.
John, it didn't go too great. Yeah.
I'll go Puna Ford with the Rams. Just I saw some reactions where like, Puna Ford was a 1-year wonder with the Chargers. Like hell he was. Puna Ford was excellent with the Seattle Seahawks through much of his career there. Shores up a need for them in terms of just getting some size, run stopping size, girth, width, not height, run stopping ability, and yeah, I think he's just one of those chronically underrated NFL players who's good everywhere he goes and makes sense next to the players that they already have on their roster. Questionable. I mean, you could pick a litany of these. I'll go Kinlaw. What?
Yeah, that was the one. That was the most surprising contract in free agency, if I
Like,
had to choose one.
especially because the Commanders had all this money and so many areas of need on defense. Defensive tackle wasn't really one of them because you have Deron Payne and Johnny Newton, who they drafted last year, thinking that was a big reason why they moved on from Jonathan Allen. Why are they spending money on the interior of the defensive line for a player who was not good in San Francisco and didn't live up to his draft status? Is this like an Adam Peters thing coming from San Francisco? Because I do not understand this one at all.
Right. Well, certainly that relationship had to have been a big factor, but I had to ask around to people that were covering the Jets and were involved with the Jets. Like, did Kinlaw have a good year? Did I miss that he had a great year? Because he was 1 for 8 in New York, and I think the idea was like he stabilized his career, he was fine. But that one I didn't see coming at all.
Yeah. How about you? I mean, there's so many.
Yeah, I think in terms of what affects who could be playing deep into the playoffs, my question is how good are Javon Hargrave and Jonathan Allen still?
Mm,
Because I Hargrave's on his 4th contract. You know, I almost forget that he was with the Steelers and underrated back then, and then Eagles, and he's coming off a major injury with the 49ers, and we'll see what the details are there. And then Jonathan Allen did not take much of a discount. He got paid good money, like 20 million guaranteed. I think it's essentially a 2-year deal. Was he a difference maker last year? If those two guys are good, man,
yeah.
that Vikings defense is
Woo!
awesome. But they're paying
Yeah.
them to be really good. It's a question. I don't have an answer, but that's my question.
Yeah. I forgot to mention Hargrave when I went through the signings. It's an interesting bet for a Vikings defense that really got nothing out of the interior pass rush last year. A defense that really has been riding on scheme the last couple of years with Brian Flores. They have added talent that has played better in Minnesota than anywhere else in free agency. I mean, that's the funny thing about the Vikings, right? Like they've been much better in some ways with free agents than
Mm.
draft picks. There's been some draft picks that have hit, but Dallas Turner didn't really do a lot last year. But Van Ginkel came in, was amazing for them. Grenard, I thought, was a good signing. He played really well. A lot of the guys in the secondary linebackers played
Byron
well.
Murphy, who they just re-signed,
Byron
was a free agent
Murphy,
when he
I'll get to
first
that
arrived.
one. So I do wonder, look, if Brian Flores looks at these two players and thinks I can get the the most out of them, and maybe their performance staff as well. I tend to trust his judgment at this point in terms of the free agents that they've added. But these are, older. Hargrave, as you said, coming off the injury. So yeah, I think it is. That's going to be an interesting one. The Grady Jarrett one, I also say I don't understand that at all, but we don't have to get into that. That's just a lot of money for an older player. Edges. So we got some news last night. Joey Bosa, 1 year, $12.6 million deal with the Buffalo Bills. That might have been an up to. Josh Sweat was the big one. 4 years, $76 million with the Cardinals, who did have a lot of money to spend and a need. 41 guaranteed, reuniting with Jonathan Gannon. Khalil Mack, 1 year, $18 million for the Chargers. Hassan Reddick, 1 year, $14 million with the Bucks. Landry, you alluded to this, Harold Landry, 3 years, $43.5 million, 26 guaranteed with the Pats. Chase Young, 3 years, $51 million with the Saints.
Bringing him back.
Malcolm Kuntz, 1 year, $12 million with the Raiders. Dayo Odeyingbo, 3 years, $48 million with the Bears. The Bills extended Gregg Rousseau, 4 years, $80 million, 54 guaranteed. The Falcons signed Leonard Floyd to a 1 year, $10 million deal. Some guys still out there: Von Miller, Matthew Judon, DeMarcus Lawrence, Za'Darius Smith. So the olds. All right, what's one that you liked?
I like Malcolm Kuntz that they didn't let all their good young players leave. I like that it was 1 for 12, so he'll get the money that he deserves if he turns into the player they expect. I know he's coming off a serious injury, but he did miss all of last year, so he had a long time to recover. And there's just not many guys who can bend the edge like him in the NFL. And that closing stretch he had in 23 really sticks with me because he gave it to Garrett Bowles, he gave it to Rashawn Slater, he gave it to good tackles. And I like they watched a couple people leave the building that are good young players for them, but I'm glad they bet on Kuntz.
Yeah, I thought he would get more. I wonder if he was offered more and thought, I'm going to do the flyer so that I can rebuild my value. But I do like that for the Raiders as far as a young homegrown player who I think, like you said, was quite good with healthy. I keep doing this, but I'm going to go with an extension rather than a free agent. I think the Gregg Rousseau extension was smart and will age well. That's really like $20 million a year. He probably is never going to be like one of the true dudes in the league, like the top 10, 12, maybe edges. But he's right outside there for me. I think he's really good in run defense. He's really reliable. I would love him as the second edge, and I think $20 million a year, totally reasonable for a player who plays a lot, by the way. I do question whether they're done in Buffalo. I wouldn't be surprised if they draft pretty high because I still think they need pass rush juice. Joey Bosa is an interesting signing for me, but that just feels like it's a 1 year veteran flyer. Let's see if he's got anything left to give. Obviously, he's been very injured. One thing I will say about Joey Bosa, though, is I was looking at his get off numbers on NGS, and yeah, there's still a decent speed there. It hasn't fallen off of a cliff. I am wary of him, though, being a game changer. So as much as I like the Gregg Rousseau extension, I still feel like they need to continue taking swings at edge.
Yeah, I like the Rousseau move too, like a solid guy who could have like a Jadeveon Clowney type career without the big pop. My question was about Bosa, so while we're on the Bills, like why do they think he's different than Von Miller? And
because it's only 1 year, $12 million.
Yeah, it's 1 year.
Von Miller deal was disastrous.
It potentially cost them a Super Bowl because if you had prime Von Miller out there, that would make a difference. But if you had used those resources differently, who knows what they would have been. I hear you, and that's good to hear with the NGS numbers. If you watched Week 1 last year, he was maybe the best player in the league. Like he was so good, and immediately got hurt. I think it was a nerve issue, and he talked about it publicly. He was almost tearful about it. Like he's let his team down by not being on the field. So he just played through it, and every week it was almost painful to watch that he'd make a couple plays, but he wouldn't make it through the game. He has played a total of 1,000 snaps over the last 3 years. So that's 1,000 snaps, and that's the most he played was last year, where he was clearly playing through it. In some games, he just wasn't there. and they would just play him 15 snaps, and other weeks he wasn't. So he was there. So that's a lot of money to me. When a guy like Reddick, for instance, was out there, I think Reddick was a much better just guy to take a shot with on a 1-year deal than Bosa.
I actually like that a lot for the Bucks too.
Me too.
I agree. 1 year, only 12 guaranteed. Clearly last year was weird and off, the whole time. And so I think betting on his potential, I mean, if he's anywhere close to what he was before last year, that's going to be a home run signing for them. I'm sorry, Saints fans, but yet again, I don't. Chase Young, 3 years, $51 million. Who do you think you are?
This is why they had to restructure Derek Carr and the other 7 players so that they could spend in free agency this year. And then I don't think they got the players they wanted, so they settled for keeping Chase Young.
I would also throw out the Falcons, Leonard Floyd, 1 year, $10 million. Why? I don't know.
Not a good sign when a team cuts you, Leonard Floyd, and you actually get a raise from the next team. That was weird, right?
All right, so linebackers. I'm not even going to read the dollar figures because literally everybody got like a 3-year, $10 to $15 million deal. It's all pretty damn close. Dre Greenlaw to the Broncos. Nick Bolton back to the Chiefs. Jamie Sherwood stayed with the Jets. Ernest Jones stayed with the Seahawks. Robert Spillane to the Patriots. Landon Roberts on a 1-year deal. I think there's some other smaller ones, but those are the big linebacker deals signed thus far. By the way, it should be noted, they also all happened really fast, I feel like, and early and free, except for the Dre Greenlaw. Like, teams did not let their linebackers walk out the door, which I thought was interesting, Greg, because, it's just not something we've seen in the past. So I think there's definitely something going on with the league valuing veteran experience at the position.
You've been on it where it's so hard to find a rookie or second-year linebacker that helps you, that this is a position a little bit like defensive tackle, but even more. I'm glad they all got paid, and they're so much more valuable in year 4 or 5. Everyone was talking about running backs, like that market would change. No, that market did not change. But now you look, and Fred Warner has like all these guys who are so much worse than him and so much less accomplished, and they all got more guaranteed money than Fred Warner. And I'll just kick it off with the one I like because you didn't mention him yet. I'm going to go Zach Bond and just say thank you for resetting that market, because for an extra $2 million, you're right, everyone got the same contract, but for an extra $2 million a year, an extra like 3 or 4 guaranteed, you get Zach Bond, and he deserves it. It's like solid, cornerback money. Like, he's still not getting even more than DJ Reed. It's right around DJ Reed and Carlton Davis and those cornerbacks. And I just think he was absolutely worth it. It was a rare 1-year wonder where he is so valuable to that specific team or any team running that specific defense that in the scheme of things, I still think that's underpaid compared to some of these rotational defensive tackles getting $13, $14 million a year. So just kudos to Zach Bond. What a come up. And I like that he set the market so high.
I think he was the right player for the Eagles to keep too.
Right.
Obviously, they've had a lot of defensive talent walk out the door. CJ Gardner-Johnson is so funny because they keep bringing him back and then getting rid of him. It's like, how annoying is he? I really want to know. But that one made sense. I mean, all these, like Ernest Jones, we saw how he
love the Ernest Jones one.
Seahawks defense, reasonable deal, made sense. I'll go with Dre Greenlaw for the one that I liked. Again, 3 years, 35 is, again, they're about the same. So he had the Achilles injury, and I was concerned about that because we've seen with the quarterbacks how it affects him. He looked fine when he came back at the very end of the Niners season. Frankly, better than fine. In one of the games, I remember being like, well, damn, Greg Greenlaw still got it. And now he's even further removed from that injury. I thought when he was healthy in San Francisco, excellent player. His absence was really felt next to Fred Warner, a guy who has, pretty rare range and coverage ability at the position. I think, from what I've heard, has always kind of wanted to be the dude, like, on a defense. And it was such a need for Denver because this was a fantastic defense, but you really saw teams zero in on the linebacker position as a weakness in coverage for them as the weeks went by. So I love that they addressed that, shored that up, because it was really one of the very few needs that they had on that side of the ball.
Yeah, I loved it as a risk reward. I had a hard time finding a linebacker contract that I didn't like. So my question was just going to be about the Broncos, which is just what is this defense in the best way possible? They were so like crazy to watch and so aggressive and so fun to watch. And then you throw Greenlaw and Hufanga from the 49ers into the mix, like that is just a nasty defense that I would not want to have to go against.
Agree. Sherwood was great. Bolton, that was actually going to be my question, because I thought he was going to be the odd man out because they're pretty deep at linebacker and there's other needs. Justin Reed. Let's view it through that lens. How do you feel about the decision to let Reed walk and sign Bolton? Because I'm a little bit dubious of that, to be honest.
You know, Bolton's younger, second contract versus third contract. They do coach up the secondary so well, so maybe that's the thinking, that it is hard to find these 3-down linebackers in the draft. I guess I could question Robert Spillane, by the way. Does he really fit in this group with these guys? Is he really a dude? He was pretty great for the Raiders the last couple of years, but nearing 30, definitely not as athletic. One of the highest success stories ever to score like in the 5th percentile of the relative athletic score at the combine. So shout out to Robert Spillane, a Mike Vrabel type of guy.
Okay, corners, a lot of deals, a lot of big deals. Nobody who really reset the market, so to speak. I guess Horn is now, so he did reset the market, pardon me. But it wasn't like a dramatic, I think Stingley is going to be the dramatic resetting when we get that one you allude to. But so JC Horn, Carolina Panthers, gave a 4-year extension worth up to $100 million, $70 million guaranteed. So that's real money. Got to pay someone in Carolina. Byron Murphy stays with the Vikings, 3 years, 66. Pretty big deal. DJ Reed to the Lions, 3 years, $48 million. Joining DJ Reader.
Good call.
Sorry. Carlton Davis, Patriots. This was interesting to me. 3 years, $60 million, 34.5 guaranteed. So he got a pretty big deal after a very good season with the Detroit Lions, the aforementioned Detroit Lions. Travarius Ward to the Colts. This is a new Colts teams that has cheaped out on the back end of the defense, paid for both a safety we'll talk about, and Travarius Ward, 3 years, up to $60 million, 35 guaranteed. Paulson Adebo to the Giants, 3 years, 30.
That got corrected weirdly. It's 54. Okay. Pretty much the same contract as everyone else, but it was widely reported as 30 for some reason, and I tried to find out what happened here. I think it was just aggregation gone wrong.
Okay. Brandon Stevens, 3 years, 36 with the Jets. The Chargers let Christian Fulton walk. He signed with the Chiefs, 2 years, $20 million, 15 guaranteed. But they ended up signing Dante Jackson to a 2-year, $13 million deal. Mike Hughes back to the Falcons. Guys still out there, Kendall Fuller, Stephon Gilmore, and Asante Samuel Jr. Which of these deals did you like?
Oh, I almost wanted you to go first because I didn't want to go too Patriots heavy. Let's go Charvarius Ward then. I just think he's a good candidate for a bounce back. You know, he had a horrible personal tragedy, which he spoke eloquently about, losing his daughter, something he was dealing with really for more than a year, and was ready for a fresh start somewhere else. And if you think back to 23, he was one of the best cornerbacks in the league. I like looked at some of the numbers in the playoffs that year, and he didn't have any because no one ever threw at him. Like he is the type of cornerback, kind of like a Gilmore, that I do think tends to age well. He's not winning with quick change of direction skills. Not that he's a negative in that, but a big outside cornerback who plays physical. And I think a good bounce back candidate at the right time. It is the biggest investment Chris Ballard has made in 9 years of free agency, or in 9 years just paying his secondary. So I like that the Colts tried to spend a little money this year.
Yeah, I am happy they didn't just bring in Lou Anarumo and said, make it work. Right, they've actually given him some players. Cam Bynum is the other. We're talking about him, the safety. They signed to a sizable deal. We anticipate, this defense is going to look pretty different from Gus Bradley. They're going to play more man coverage. So bringing in Ward, who's a corner who has historically been very good in man coverage, I like that. I like the possibility for a bounce back that you alluded to. I liked this signing. I think Stephen Holder, who's our Colts reporter, said it was the most they've ever spent on a corner, which is crazy. But yeah, I liked it. I already talked about the DJ Reed deal. I thought this was a home run for Detroit value wise. I mean, just a guy who's been good everywhere and allows them to onboard the youngsters. Ennis Rakestraw coming off the injury they drafted last year. So it's a nice, last year they just kind of ran out of corners, but I like that they have some young players and now bringing in a veteran in Reed with Carlton Davis walking out the door. That was one that I was I like it, but tentatively. I
Mm-hmm.
like the scheme fit. Speaking of guys who play press man coverage, it kind of makes me think that the Patriots defense isn't going to look that different schematically from what it's been, which is not surprising with Mike Vrabel. I will say, I am a little bit apprehensive of his age and is he gonna actually continue playing at the level that we saw in Detroit for the injury? But overall, I still like this. It's not
You know
that
what
much
made me feel better was that the Patriots had to come over the top to the Lions. And then when you looked at the final, like beneath the hood numbers, it's really 3 for 54. And so he only got about 6 million more than Reed over 3 years, and he only got 4 or 5 more guaranteed. And I understand these players, they have to make a lifetime's worth of money. I think that's all it came down to. But by all accounts, the Lions kind of had a price for him. I wouldn't be surprised if it was basically DJ Reed's price. And they're like, we're not going any higher than that. And the Patriots went over the top with $5 or $6 million. That was good enough. It gives them an identity. It gives them a strength. I just don't know what to make of this Patriots team other than Drake May. So those two cornerbacks next to each other, I'm looking forward to that.
It makes me too wonder if they were to say draft Travis Hunter, if he's available when they're picking. Do they draft? I mean, he's instantly the best wide receiver on this roster. You kind of, and now you've got two very capable corners. Does he end up playing receiver more for the Patriots than corner? But is that the right way to approach things with a player like that? I mean, he is an amazing receiver, so I wouldn't hate it, but it does raise that question. Or do you take Abdul Carter because you still need pass rush?
I think there are a decent amount of teams that see him as a receiver. I don't think it's
Yeah,
the majority, but Daniel
there are
Jeremiah
some.
at our place does too, and that I'd be all for that. That would be my dream Patriots draft scenario. Travis Hunter, wide receiver.
He is really, really good at receiver. I mean, he's really, really good at corner too. So, my question was, it's a little bit low hanging fruit. Brandon Stevens, 3 years, $36 million with the Jets. So I don't have the guarantees in front of me, but is it really worth the minimal savings over DJ Reed, who I think is a much better corner? I have questions.
Yeah, that was one of the most surprising moves in free agency. The Jets have had a couple moves that you're just like, you gave $10 million to Andre Cisco. Just a couple of little moves here and there that were like, they're seeing the field a little differently. I was very surprised that Stevens had that market.
Any other dubious ones for you before we wrap the safe?
Not dubious, but I do have a question. This one is for you specifically. After, the three-time champion Chiefs, who no ball, I think we can admit, gave Fulton 15 guaranteed and $20 million. Are you going to apologize for all your Christian Fulton slander over the years? To me personally.
I thought he was good last year with the Chargers. And I rode for him in Tennessee, honestly.
Okay, maybe
him.
I'm being unfair here.
But I was more slandering the Chargers defense as a whole. This was an interesting decision to me, right? Because we've talked about how the Chiefs that feel that anyone can play in that secondary. Clearly they weren't pleased with what happened last year when they had injuries in their cornerback room.
And he was kind of a bargain pick too. He's not making nearly as much money as even Brandon Stevens.
This contract is fine.
It's
completely fine with it for Kansas City. All right, safeties. Okay, some pretty big deals here. Notably, Javon Holland, 3 years, $45 million with the Giants. Hufanga, I guess not notably, because this surprised me. He came in below Trevon Merrick, 3 years, $51 million with the Panthers. Hufanga, you alluded to this, 3 years, 45 with the Broncos. Jeremy Chin, 2 years, 16 with the Raiders. You mentioned the Cisco 1 year deal with the Jets for 10. Cam Bynum, 4 years, $60 million with the Colts. So similar APY. Justin Reed, 3 years, $31 million with the Saints for some reason. The Texans traded for CJ Gardner-Johnson. They traded away Kenyon Green, who was awful for them, but will probably be awesome for the Eagles, irritatingly. Those were the big ones. Justin Simmons is still out there. So everybody came in pretty similar, actually. Again, nobody really blew it out of the water. I thought Holland was going to get more, but is there any of these that jumped out to you as being particularly
I
good?
think he thought he was going to get more. It was getting out there publicly that maybe the market wasn't as big. But I'll give a shout out to you because I asked people for feedback, the smartest people I know, and one of your items of feedback was you got to move up Morrig, and the NFL agreed. He had a really competitive market, and that's my deal that I like. In that, I think the Panthers came into this looking to spend money, and they, Milton Williams, the Patriots went over the top. Who knows? They were involved in some other ones, and I do think he's a young, quality player. If you're gonna pay a little bit of a premium in free agency, do it for someone that's 25 years old and is just starting to play his best ball, and it's not a short-term solution because they spent a lot of money on Tershawn Wharton too, which I also liked, and then other guys who just kind of raised the floor for a team that needs it. But Morrig, to me, is a little more exciting. That could he develop into a Pro Bowl type of player?
Yeah, I kind of suspected that he might have a bigger market just because of his range. And I do think he's a decent tackler. I was surprised that the Raiders didn't try to kind of find a way to keep him, and I guess they got priced out of it. They have some holes now on that defense. I'll go with Cam Bynum to the Colts. It's a decently sized deal, but again, this kind of goes back to what I was saying about Ward there. Lou Anarumo, I just really like the fact that they gave him veteran players to work with, because what we saw in Cincinnati was he's very good with vets and less so with rookies. Throwing that out there. So, that it's a very complicated defense. The safety, he asks a lot about this of the safeties. Jesse Bates famously flourished with him. But then he struggled when, with some, I guess there was sort of, Bolton, or not Bolton, who do they sign as their big safety signing? What's his name from the Rams, who was not good? Nick something. Anyway, Nick Scott. Yeah. So I don't know. I think just in terms of they needed a free safety, I do think you can say, well, Brian Flores' defense, how well are guys going to play outside of it? But I think he has a pretty good all-around skill set.
Plus the celebrations that maybe he brings to
culture.
Indianapolis, or do they stay in Minnesota? I don't know, but he was kind of the main guy with that.
I think that he has to wait and see how the defense is, because those celebrations do not hit if your defense sucks. My question isn't a criticism, but a question, which is the Giants deal with Javon Holland. I think Javon Holland's a good player. He's young. However, this was raised to me on Blue Sky, and I thought it was good because I was like, this is a good deal, reasonable, makes sense. But then a Giants fan hit me back and was like, okay, but wouldn't you rather just have Xavier McKinney, right?
Yep.
And I think that's where I raised the question of process with all of this, because they ended up paying a safety who's just not as good as the one that they walked out the door. So I still feel good about it and what he brings to the defense, but I think the process that got them here is not great.
I had the exact same question, and it was based partly on the in-season Hard Knocks, which again points out why no team wanted to do it, which is that Joe Shane's whole thing is we want to pay premium positions. And that was part of his explanation for not bringing back Saquon and Xavier McKinney. And then you end up spending a decent amount of money on Devin Singletary. But then this year, you end up paying the money that could have gone to Xavier McKinney, to Holland. And they're comparable players. But it just screams to me of a guy who's kind of making it up as he goes along. Maybe like some of those Love is Blind guys, just doesn't really have too many fundamental beliefs that he sticks to for too long.
Well,
so, I don't know why I'm killing the Love is Blind guys out of nowhere here. I just watched it last night, finally. That's why.
You watched your reunion?
Yeah. Yes, that's what I watched that in the finale in a row. Yeah.
Oh, God. I had real difficulty doing the power. I'm looking at my board right now. The bottom between it's all 5 guys in the bottom. And I really struggled with how to rank Devin, Alex, Dave, Joey, Ben. It was brutal.
To me, if you don't have Dave and Ben, a hard last and second to last. You're doing it
But
wrong.
Joey, the
I don't
reunion.
care. I don't
Rude.
care. He still gave. He had a bad performance, but he still gave me more. Ultimately, I heard you say you had some commenters pushing back on that. You guys were too mean to Ben. You guys were too nice to Ben and Dave the whole time. They were loathsome individuals.
Horrible. Meanwhile, Daniel, hey, all-time Love is Blind success story for our guy Daniel. Okay, if you're listening to this and you have no idea what we're talking about, I'm sorry. But if you are a Love is Blind fan, go check out my recap pods with Dave Dennis Jr. They're available at the Love is Kimes podcast feed and also at youtube.com/@Mina Kimes, which is where you can also watch this pod. It is available on YouTube as well. I will be back next week, but that's a wrap for our free agency review with the great Gregg Rosenthal of NFL Daily. Thank you, as always, to my friends at Omaha Productions, Kirsten Sebecki, Anthony Jimenez, Owen Saylor, Jack Foster, Tucker Tashjian for producing this show. See you guys next week.